from the CyberHub bunker and studio. You're tuning in to the CyberHub podcast, Tech Corner. And now, join me in welcoming your host and CISO, James Azar.
Hello, boys and girls, men and women, people of the globe who are tuning in to another awesome episode of Veteran November. If you've missed this series and you're tuning in for the first time because of Charissa, you got to go back and listen to all the other ones. We've had like 20 some odd veterans at this point on the show, all amazing, brave men and women of all races, creeds, religions, backgrounds that serve in America is what makes this country great. Joining me for today's episode is Charissa Hightower. What's up?
Hey, thanks for having me, James. I really appreciate it.
So excited to have you on. But before we get started, folks, if you have not subscribed, please do so right now. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe, hit the turn on, and turn on the bell notification. If you're watching us on Rumble, subscribe to our channel. And if you're on Locals, this is part of our free content, but you can get a lot more content on our paid wall. So do so there as well. All right, I'm done promoting, Charissa, I promise. But I have to do it, right? Like if I don't do it,
of course. Of course.
I shouldn't apologize, but you know, I do it every time because it just feels awkward.
Don't apologize. You should definitely promote.
Yeah. So awesome.
And you do a great job at it. So
thank you. I try to keep it real. I believe authenticity is everything, and so Charissa, who is a very authentic person, we were just having an awesome conversation before we got started, is joining me. And Charissa is, so people think of the military, right?
Of course, yeah.
And you served. What branch of the service did you serve in? How long were you in for?
U.S. Navy, 8 years.
Okay. Navy. Why Navy? Can I ask why Navy?
You know, I don't even have a good answer for that because I didn't have anyone. I had 4 brothers. I was the only girl that went to the military. No one in my family was in the military. So I just kind of, I was like, this sounds good. I was like this, I know nothing.
I will say, the Navy to me is like really fascinating because a lot of the women I speak with are either in the Navy or Air Force. And I've always kind of like tried to find that balance of why, now we're seeing more women enlist in the Marine Corps. We're seeing a lot more women in the Army. But it's a very kind of like interesting thing because when we go back to like when I was in the military, most of the women I encountered were either in the Navy or Air Force, but they weren't really in the Army or Marine Corps. So it's great that we're seeing the shift of more of that, but the Navy.
That's interesting because all the females that I worked with in Intel when I was in were all Marines. So that's interesting.
So Maria Thompson, she's the CISO for the state of North Carolina, and the chief risk officer there. She's a Marine, and she was a former Intel officer, and she's like an unbelievable person. Like. She is like the baddest of the bad. Like we were in Israel last summer. I think her and I did like a bunch of like 10-kilometer walks across the boardwalk in Tel Aviv. Just a bunch of times just shooting, just talking and just like, she's the baddest of the bad. I have an appreciation for that. It's a challenge because the military has been predominantly male dominated. And so it's not very inclusive, and the culture also sometimes is not as inclusive. What did you encounter any of that in your time in the service?
Interesting enough, I didn't. And I don't know if that's how I was, just because I was used to being, like I said, I had brothers. I was used to being with the boys. I didn't see any of that. And Intel, I think it's especially not as noticeable because it's so competitive. And when you're in class together, it's, everybody's working, if you've earned your spot, you've earned your spot. And so I never really had to unfortunately deal with any of that.
So being on the Navy and Navy Intel, were you on any ships? And did you actually end up in sea?
No, I actually did not. I did 8 years in the Navy, never went to sea. I spent my entire time at the National Security Agency. And the way they do it in Intel is, we're all joint service, as you know.
Right.
And if you're at an agency, then you're in that billet. So you can either be in a Navy billet or the agency's billet. And I was always in an agency billet. So they got say over where I went and what I did. So never any sea time for me.
Do you regret that?
Yeah, I do a little bit. I mean, if you would ask me then when I was getting out, because I had so many obviously shipmates that were going to sea, and horrible stories of being out for so long and everything like that. So if you asked me then, I probably would be like, yeah, I'm good. But now, yeah, of course. I definitely wish I would have had that experience.
Yeah, I've had a bunch of friends that were in the Navy, and the one thing they talk about is the fact that they got to see the world as part of their service. Right, because you end up in Bahrain or anywhere in Europe or Africa or Asia, and so there. I know a lot of people that enlist in the Navy because they want to travel, and the Navy gives them that opportunity. They get to see the world in a capacity, which is
absolutely. And I got to travel quite a bit. I was deployed several times. It just wasn't ever by boat.
That's awesome.
So the rest of the Navy probably hates me, but it's how it goes.
I don't know that they hate you. I think, every job respects itself, right? And in the military, we used to say, people would ask you your MOS or what you did. And the one thing I learned in the service is even the guy who's cooking food is just as important as the guy who's firing a tank, flying a plane.
Oh, absolutely.
Shooting a weapon. I mean, I think there's no difference in MOSs, The only difference is like the Air Force, for chefs, like for food cookers, they actually recruit chefs. We all just get some random
you just get whatever.
Cook. Right. The guy knows how to make scrambled eggs. Great. Bring him on. Make him runny.
Hired.
Done. So
yeah. The Air Force has got us beat on chow halls for sure.
Yeah, every time. I hated it so much, right? Like you go to like an Air Force base, like the first thing you're looking for, you're like, where's chow hall? Chow hall.
Yeah.
And and you load the plate. Like you ever go to like a buffet and you haven't eaten in like a day, and like you load up your plate with food, like it's a tower of food. But like that's any guy who's not Air Force in an Air Force chow hall.
I mean, it's just how it is. You got to take advantage of it when you're there.
Yeah, like strike while it's hot. So talk a little bit about your transition. So you served for 8 years. So you did your 2 tours. You transitioned out. Did you go into what was that transition like? What were some of the experiences you had, and what was it like to leave after 8 years? 8 years is a very long time.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't, at getting out and transitioning, I don't think I really knew what I was going to do. Because at that time, we're talking over 10 years ago, intel, cyber threat intelligence, things like that, the jobs weren't plentiful. We were still at a point where if you did intel or any job really in the military, you were kind of like, what am I going to do when I get out? How am I going to translate this skill set? I ended up, I really was kind of like, I was kind of shooting in the dark, looking at online jobs, et cetera, and kind of looking for those keywords of, analyst and intel and things like that to see what I could maybe be a fit for. I ended up applying for a position at the Air Force CERT down in San Antonio, Texas on Lackland, and got that position. And that was really my first experience in cyber. Because at the time in 2008 or 9, when I was transitioning out as well, they weren't training in cyber. They were just starting to, or at least the Navy was just starting to, we call them rates for the job. They were just starting to make that rate and transition current sailors over to that. So I did not have my training in the military because they weren't training for it yet. And so I transitioned to the Air Force CERT, and that's where I had all of my cyber training, really, is because they took you and you went through an entire course with them, and you had to be certified as, a computer emergency response analyst before you got on the watch floor. So that was my first introduction to it, trained by them. And this is, you're looking back, it's a really interesting time because computers weren't considered a weapon yet. 8570 didn't exist yet. We were all just, doing our thing. But the transition was, it was definitely, it was interesting. I consider myself lucky that, I'm not lucky in the sense that now we've got another thing to worry about, national security wise, but that a bunch of vets now had a way to apply their skills that they had learned in the service.
Yeah, so you bring up a very interesting point, which is very typical of people who are in intel, which is we leave the service and we end up still in the military as a civilian in some capacity, right? You end up, and so how long did you do that for before you actually got an actual civilian job?
Oh gosh, just up until about 5 years ago. So not very long. I did that for another 6 or 7 years that I was a DoD contractor.
So in all, you served our nation 15 years, 16 years.
It ended up being about 16, 17 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So we talk about this and I've talked about it in previous episodes, but it's the transition that's probably the most difficult part for most people when they leave the service, because we get structure, we have, a specific set of disciplines, we learn a language. Like military language is completely different from civilian language. It's yes, sir, yes, ma'am.
Absolutely.
First name basis doesn't exist. We call each other by our last names. If you walked into your office and you went, Jones, come here, they'd be like, well, she's in a bad mood. And you're like, no, that's like normal. Like, I forgot what my first name was for 4 years because everyone called me by my last name. As did I.
Like, no one called me by Charissa until about 5 years ago. And I had to it took a little bit.
Who's Charissa? Who's
I thought my mother was in the back or something. I was like, is my family here? Yeah, so it's an interesting transition for sure.
Yeah, that has a way of impacting you psychologically. So look at this, 16, 17 years that you're, in that, military. I don't want to call it bubble because it's not. You're in that military ecosystem of, discipline, of integrity, of structure, of all of that. Then you go to the civilian world, which by all means, if people want any proof of how crazy the civilian world is, the month of November in the year 2020 is just plain proof of just how wackadoodle that is.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that first transition 5 years ago or however long that was, of going from, to an actual civilian job, and what was it like to really step outside that ecosystem?
Oh man, it was it was just a huge learning process because you didn't know, you were so in that environment for that long that, and as the military, we're very straightforward, very blunt. Everything is very time sensitive. And that doesn't go away, when you get out and just, and transition to the private sector. So a lot of that for me it was half like going into an environment where you're in a meeting and you're straightforward and blunt, and, people don't take it that way. They don't take it as like, well, she's just giving me the facts. They're like, whoa, it's aggressive. And so there's a lot of those situations that I dealt with and had to kind of really think before I spoke about my delivery of things. And then there was the intel in general, because it was, coming from somewhere, especially NSA. There's so many brilliant people and so many brilliant minds. You're just Joe Schmo in the corner. You know what I mean? It's like the person sitting next to you is a savant sometimes. And so it was, you never think about, you always think that you know less, if that makes sense. You're always learning and from someone that's next to you. And so when I came into intel, I think I was it was a shift for me to kind of understand that I had to teach what intel was. There was a huge gap between knowing the kind of skill sets that you needed to build a team and really just knowing what intel meant in general. And so I found it I kind of felt a little odd, teaching. Like, I don't remember ever speaking about the intel cycle while I was in the Navy or at the agency. I don't remember ever talking about how to report or time sensitive and actionable information. And so I found myself in a teaching position. And that was it was a little like, to people, it was a little uncomfortable at first. But it's been good. It's done good for me, but it was definitely an interesting transition.
Yeah. The idea of fact-based coming off as aggressive is very relatable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right? Because in the service, we're very, in your face. It is what it is. This is the fact. Nothing else matters. There's no twisting the facts. When you want to twist the facts, that goes up the chain of command, and they can do with it what they want up the chain of command. I think anyone who's been in Intel knows that you can write the best report in the world, and it'll be misconstrued by the time it reaches the person it needs to reach. Right. So we do kind of have that in the military. The only difference is the ability to listen to what you have to say and understand what you're saying is very different in the service than it is in the private sector. What'd you do to overcome that? Like, what was some of the stuff you had to kind of internalize as you were thinking of how to deliver stuff that may have been critical for your organization?
Yeah. I think I just, I had to start giving the why to things. Like, if I delivered facts, I learned to start following it up with, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're doing this. This is why I'm giving your information, and just kind of expand on it and not be so point blank, I guess. And it was, just as something as, adding a little more context to what you're saying, or maybe changing, your tone of voice. And I'm definitely I'm not a rude person, or anything like that. It's just was something that you get used to. We brief, right? And in Intel or in the military in general. And if you don't stick to the facts, then, you're going to probably, it's not going to go over too well, from someone higher up. Or like, you're taking too long. So it was just an adjustment of words, and just internalizing like how something might come across to them as rather blunt than how I really mean it.
Yeah. I'm still learning.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, I suck at it. Like, I'm so honest sometimes, like brutally honest, that people don't know how to take it.
Yeah.
Like,
I still am. I think when you're dealing with, and there's really no, especially like, going back to like things being time sensitive too, it's just having to switch to that, because things were not, like if I sent a report out on a Friday, it was like, it was no one's going to get to it till Monday, and that for me was like, kind of blew my mind,
This can't wait. This can't wait.
I was like, people get exploited over the weekend too. So it was just one of those, like, you would never set on something, in the military, especially in, a type of intel actionable information situation. So it was definitely an adjustment. It still is honestly, a lot of situations, I'm lucky now. I work with a lot of vets, and most of my social network are all vets. So it's definitely, I'm lucky to have a lot of the same people in my circle that get it.
Yeah, I think when you end up working with vets in the civilian world, it makes that a little bit easier. But in the private sector, honesty is almost frowned upon sometimes, I feel.
Yeah, it is. And that's another struggle, as, just sitting back and like, we stand up for, traditionally that's what we're there for, right? What we, honor, courage, commitment. We stand up for what's right. And that's what we're fighting for. And so as, going to a situation like that, where now people don't like honesty and a lot of people don't speak up, for things, it's, there's several situations that I've come across as the bad guy, because I'm calling things out that, people don't ever, that's not the normal in their environment.
Yeah. That's always a challenge. 5 years I've been a civilian now I've been in the private sector for a little bit over 11 years.
Okay.
And and an entrepreneur 10 of those, because I did like 1 year as an employee somewhere, and it's just like, I can't do this. Like, it's very difficult because I don't get along with HR, because I'm just brutally honest. Like, I am HR's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Even when I had my own company, like my HR people would be like, James, you can't say that. And I'm like, it's the truth. Yes, you can say the truth. That's why it's called the truth.
The truth.
That's why it is a fact.
Yes.
That's why it is something actually happening. If the sky is burning, you don't say, well, the sky kind of looks hot. The sky's burning. Fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's I don't know. I still have that issue. I think that people who listen to the podcast know, like, they're just like, okay, I'm very, very brutally honest. It's a fault. But I think when you come from Intel, and you come from the military, brutally honest is the only way. You can't spin a story.
Yeah. That's not your job. And I mean, come on, if you spin something, then I mean, lives are at risk. There's a whole different consequence, in the military. So it's you gotta, like, my job, especially coming from SIGINT, is like, I report the facts and that's it.
Yeah.
It's up to the consumers of that report to translate and, action upon it how they feel necessary. But you just don't have, facts. That's it.
So you said that when you left the service, you went to work at the Air Force. That's when you were first really introduced to cyber.
Yes.
So did you do a boot camp? Did you go to school for it? Did you do some certs? What was that like?
Yeah. So they had their own, I guess, internal training that they did. So the Air Force actually trained us. We did go through a type of boot camp situation. It was a lot like being, in the military, but we were DOT contractors, but it was a lot like being back in and going through a regular course. And then we would, go onto the watch floor, and we would set side saddle, and we would do, the same kind of checklist. And I'm totally losing my thought now of like what we call them in the military.
It's okay, don't worry about it.
But it's been a while. But it's I mean, you do your checklist, you check off, you train. And then, like I said, for certs, like that wasn't a thing when I first came to the Air Force cert. And so the 8570 or like getting Security Plus or CEH or anything like that, it wasn't required. And then only after, a couple of years of being there was it required. And so I did get those. I did get those certs. And then I actually ended up moving out I was recruited by Booz Allen to come out to INTOC at NSA Washington. And so, of course, that was a whole other cyber experience. Insane. So, I had that's pre, and once again, we're going back to like, that's pre-MITRE attack, it's pre-kill chain, it's pre, everything that we were studying there, documenting TTPs and kind of, flying the plane as it's being built, I guess.
Well, you were documenting as it was happening early on. There's an aspect to that a lot of people don't, like. I feel like business doesn't look at it the same way, but government has to do that, which is you have to kind of document everything and plan ahead and see what someone's trying to do. I mean, the internet, for all its glory, was something we kind of invented that in all reality was just another communication tool that has now evolved into something so much greater than we ever fathomed. I think when they built it, they were like, oh, this is great. We can send messages. Now it's a way of life. It's not the way of life. It's the way of life.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I don't, there's a lot of, I feel like I'm grateful for the time that I did serve, because we saw a lot of, talk about communications and technology. I mean, we went from, cell phones and geospatial, chasing terrorists with phones to, there was countries that were still copying Morse code. I had to go to Morse code school. And then you come into cyber, and now I'm in cyber training. So it's, we're moving, you're moving as fast as you can to keep up, with everything. But I think that also where even, pre-cybercom and pre everything, I mean, they were kicking ass. and the intel. So, and yeah, that's something that we don't ever get to talk about, or that you're never going to hear, for good reasons. But, you've got some pretty brilliant people defending this country.
We don't need to know about it. And I think that's one of the aspects of transparency and our right to know as Americans, right? There's some stuff we don't need to know. And
Absolutely.
There's some stuff we're better off not knowing. And we don't need to talk about everything, because it's bad. I used to hate it when I'd hear a politician or someone in leadership say, we're going to attack this way and we're going to this city. And I'm like, why? Why are you saying that? Like, what? Like, really?
Yeah. I mean, kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah, like steam would shoot out of my ears because it's our tactical advantage. You're letting people know we're coming.
Yeah. Exactly.
You're eliminating an advantage. That's it's fascinating to kind of see that from the military perspective, and I can go. That's a rabbit hole for me. That's a whole rabbit hole for me. Like I've done entire talks on just leadership shutting up and then doing stuff after it happens.
Yeah.
Like brief people out. We got credible intel that so-and-so was here and we took decisive action. We did it. Here's what we did. That's it. Game over. Right? Don't say it before. Like, we know you're hiding over there, mister. We're coming for you. You're like, okay.
Well, that's operational intelligence, right? I mean, that's, intel. You're collecting intel to have an advantage, not
to give it to the press.
Not to give it to the media, not to give it to anybody. Like, you're not going to win.
Yeah, you don't win those wars. That's
you don't win those wars. No.
So
no element of surprise there.
So today you're a senior intel consultant. So you're in the CTI space essentially in cyber, right?
I am.
Cyber threat intel. What's that like?
Yes.
For you?
It's I think since I've came to the private sector, it's just been an ongoing kind of being in the teacher seat, really, and helping other organizations, in the country just understand what requirements are, what intelligence is, and how you make it actionable. And of course, there's a huge gap in just analytic methodology. How taking something and what do I do with that? How do I exploit this? So, I'm on a great team that a lot of us have a very different backgrounds, and that's kind of where we fit every day, is just helping the rest of the country get up to speed and get educated about how they can protect themselves.
Yeah, we do need to do that. We need to increase our awareness as individuals of those around us to the cyber threats that are out there. And for those who think that our cyber opponents have any ethics, none, zero. They'll go after your kids.
Yeah, no, they don't have any ethics. Everybody's free game here. But that's a big challenge too, right? In the private sector, is that it's a mentality thing. Like, coming from the military, you're used to being, the civilians aren't used to having targets, right? And they're not used to being targeted. So it's a whole mentality of like having somebody from a military background is great to have on your team, because they do have that mentality of looking at who's targeting you and why, and they accept it. It's not a scary thing to them to target or be targeted. And I think a lot of times private sector, when you look at some of the people on the team, they don't know how to look at that because they've never had to be in this position. They've never had to be in this position before, or have to look at threat actors and do any kind of profiling, right? Or anything like that. So it's just kind of it's definitely a mental shift of civilians are having to go through. Unfortunately, they're having to adjust to it.
Yeah. So we're wrapping up here. We're almost out of time, and I always go over on these episodes. I'm so bad at this. Like, time is just not my thing anymore. Like, if there's one thing I've lost all credibility from my time in the service is time management. I suck at it at this point. I've become too much of a civil. I lived in Israel for 6 years, and in Israel, when someone says 10, it's pretty much like 10:45.
Yeah. Or like living in Hawaii, right? Like the locals. It's like,
yeah, man.
I'll be there soon is like 3 days.
Yeah. Let me know. It's like ordering Uber Eats is in Hawaii. I guess that's like you want some food? Okay, we'll get it for you. You should order, dinner at breakfast and lunch at dinner and breakfast.
Oh no! When I set up cable there, they're like, yeah, okay, it's going to be 3 months. We'll be there. I was like, oh wow, okay.
Yeah, 3 months. That's crazy. No, negative. All right. What's one thing you miss about your time in the Navy?
Family. I mean, we're a family, and it just doesn't matter what's going on that day or how rough it gets. Like those are your people, and they're by you, and thick and thin. So I definitely miss that. You don't get a lot of that in the civilian world, unfortunately. But that's absolutely what I miss the most: camaraderie.
Yeah, camaraderie is something a lot of people miss nowadays.
It is. Yeah. It's I think that a lot of that's probably answered the same way.
It is. It's the number one answer to this question. I already know the answer before I ask it, but I ask it anyways. Because maybe
I could have said chow hall, right?
Air Force chow hall. What do you miss the most? Air Force chow hall.
Really? Air Force chow hall.
Really? You're in Texas, like some of the best food in the country's in Texas.
We do have pretty good tacos.
Insane food in Texas, like tacos, barbecue. A burger's an actual burger in Texas. It doesn't have mushrooms on it and all kinds of. It's a burger. It's a bun with 2 pieces of meat. It's a man thing.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Charissa, thanks so much for coming on. Thank you for your service.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much. It was an honor.
It's a pleasure. Folks, another Veteran November in the books. Charissa Hightower. Make sure you thank her for her service. Comment below. Reach out and just let her know how much you appreciate the work that she's done to serve our nation. 8 years in uniform, another about 8 or 9 years as a contractor. And a lot of times we look and we say someone served for 23 years, but then they go on and they continue to serve in a civilian role, still working within the same establishment they were in as they were enlisted. So their service goes well beyond just the time they wore the uniform and were enlisted. So with that being said, thank you folks so much for listening and tuning in. We're almost wrapping up. So remember, November 30th, you can sign up on our website or on any of our social media pages. It's actually posted there, the link to join us for a November 30th party takedown. We're going to be wrapping up Veteran November. Charissa is invited, obviously, if you can make it. It's going to be at I believe 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, I believe. I have to double check that. But we're going to be hanging out. It'll be Chris Cochran, myself, Brian Lozado, the CISO over at HBO Max, and a bunch of other people. We're going to try and get Maria Thompson from the state of North Carolina on. And it's just going to be a bunch of veterans drinking bourbon, scotch, whiskey, beer, tequila, or your choice of alcoholic beverage. And we're going to be hanging out. It's an invite only, so you do have to apply to get the link to join us. We were going to do it live, but then we decided that a bunch of people drinking on LinkedIn may not be the best thing for our careers. And so with that being said, folks, we'll wrap up this month of November, a month of Thanksgiving, a month of a lot of uncertainty in a year that's been the most challenging probably for some generations now, with a toast and a better 2021. So join us for that. You can sign up on our website at cyberhubpodcast.com under events, or you can do so on any of our social media including locals, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Parler, anywhere, any social media network. We're there. Just look us up, CyberHub Podcast, and you'll see the registration for this event. That's it for us, folks. Till next time, this is James Azar signing off, wishing you all to stay very healthy and extremely cyber safe.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.